everybody. Thanks for coming to today's webinar to talk about the H3 GrainGage and NIR system. I guess now we'll go ahead and get started into this. My name is Ryan Moses. I've been here with HarvestMaster for a little bit over 11 years, almost 12 years now. I started out in the field service department and worked my way up now to I'm the North American sales manager here at HarvestMaster. And I'll let Ray introduce himself.
Hi everybody, sorry about that. Ray Newman here. I am the product manager for HarvestMaster. Been with the company for about 4 years now, and before that I was the mechanical engineer for HarvestMaster.
All right, so hopefully most of you all are familiar with HarvestMaster, Juniper Systems, and Campbell Scientific, but I'll just real briefly run through a little history to kind of get you caught up to speed here so you know who you're talking to and where we're from and who we all are. So really it all started back in 1993 when Ron Campbell founded HarvestMaster to really meet the needs of in-field, non-combine data collection for seed researchers. And he did that with the development of what we now call grain gauges and some rugged field computers and field data collectors. And this really allowed researchers to collect and store their data right in the field during the growing season when they're taking notes, and also at harvest time with the yield data. And as the years went on with the grain gauge and the rugged field computers and the evolution of those, there was really a growing need for the rugged field computers outside of just the agriculture industry. A lot of market share there, just outside of agriculture and construction and surveying, forestry, really all over. So in 2001, the name HarvestMaster was updated to Juniper Systems Incorporated, which really just helped us gain a more diverse product lineup and customer base really outside of agriculture. So really it was just a name change to fit a broader customer base. HarvestMaster still runs strong today, and it's an integral product and brand within Juniper Systems. And also, so you know, Juniper Systems, our parent company is Campbell Scientific in Logan, Utah. So Juniper and Campbell's and, you know, HarvestMaster in that, we're all there in Logan, Utah.
Thanks, Ryan. Like Ryan said, we want to talk a little bit about NIR, and specifically NIR on the combine. So this first slide, I just wanted to briefly discuss some of the challenges with that. At HarvestMaster, we've always had a desire to put NIR on a grain gauge and provide that data right in the field to our customers. There's been some really large hurdles to overcome to be able to provide that, but we always saw the value. We would see customers bagging samples and hauling them to a different location, and we always thought, boy, if we could just somehow get them that data in the field, it would be such a value to the industry. But there were some big issues with doing that, one of which is the purchase price of NIR equipment. The price of these devices, as you probably know, can be very, very high, and it just has never made sense for us to put a sensor on our grain gauge that costs 3, 4, or 5 times as much as our grain gauge. And so that was one challenge, and then another challenge is calibrations for these devices. A lot of the manufacturers do not provide calibrations that go along with their devices. They leave it up to the purchaser to build those calibrations. And unless you have a lot of background in NIR or you have the ability to contract that out, you're going to spend 2, 3, 4 years basically developing these calibrations so you can get predictions from your NIR device. It's a long, painstaking process of acquiring samples, getting reference data, whether that be through a third-party lab or some other avenue, interpreting the raw spectrum data, building the calibrations, and it's a really complex process. And it requires a lot of inside knowledge about NIR, which many people don't have. And then another challenge that we've seen is the updating and maintenance requirements of these calibrations. So every single year, these calibrations should be updated based off different seed breeds from year to year, and that again requires taking samples, having somebody on staff that can interpret NIR data, getting reference data through a lab, and that's ongoing every single year. So overall, just you end up with a really high cost to get reliable NIR data. But HarvestMaster's never lost sight of the need for this in the industry, and we kept our eye open for a long time and just been watching and kind of trying to identify a way that we can provide this to our customers. Well, I want to talk a little bit about a company named SCiO. Some of you may have heard of these guys. They were started in 2016 under the name of Consumer Physics, and they invested about $35 million into this technology. They started out, their first product was the SCiO Mini, which you can see a picture of that on the top right. And originally it was for taking on the cob moisture of corn, and then they've expanded that throughout the years. Now there's about, fast forward to 2020, there's about 2,000 SCiO Minis in the market right now. Consumer Physics has a massive database of samples and data that they have collected where they actually provide the calibrations for customers. And then in 2020, they came out with what's called the SCiO Cup. You can see a picture of it there next to the phone. And the way that works is you just put a sample in the cup and it Bluetooths to your phone. And when you run a scan, it sends that data to the cloud, bounces it off a calibration that they have, and then sends the prediction results right back to your phone through Bluetooth. Well, when we kind of got introduced to this company, who goes by the name of SCiO now, by the way, SCiO means I know or knowledge in Latin, little piece of trivia there. We got introduced to these guys and thought, man, if we could somehow use that technology and make it local onto the machine, and we could make this applicable in seed research. There were some challenges associated with that. We knew we couldn't use a cloud-based method because you may not have cell service out in the field. And so we knew all the calibrations had to be localized. Communication from our GrainGage to the SCiO database, a lot of challenges to overcome. But really, SCiO is getting quite a good name in the industry, and really being adopted by many top seed research companies out there. And the great thing that we saw about SCiO too, not only do they develop and maintain the calibrations and make them available right away from day one, but they also have a great support system. So if we have any problems, we can just call them right away, and they're very good to work with. So we partnered with them late in 2020 to get this in the GrainGage. The interesting thing about this is the hardware was actually at an affordable price. And so we worked throughout 2021 through different design processes, and we did a lot of testing all summer long. And what we came up with, we were able to incorporate this technology into the GrainGage. And so that's what we're calling the H3.
All righty, so like Ray mentioned, you know, we partnered with SCiO a few years ago after seeing that, you know, they've addressed a lot of these challenges that Ray mentioned. And what we did was, like Ray said, we fully integrated that SCiO NIR sensor into the H2 GrainGage, and that made what we now call the H3. And you can see there in the picture that, yeah, that looks like an H2, and you don't see much different on the outside. But here in a second, we'll see the inside where everything's changed a little bit. And this is really a great addition to the GrainGage family by gaining us the affordable, the pre-calibrated moisture and constituent data, right along with our you already know about our highly accurate on-combine weight measurement. And we feel that the H3 is the industry's first affordable on-combine NIR sensor with the proven calibrations. We're super excited about that. So you keep hearing us talk about fully integrated. So here you can see in these pictures, I'll start with the one on the left, that kind of black housing there. So don't know how familiar you are the inside of the GrainGage or the test weight chamber in the bucket, but that black housing there is where the brains of the sensor are located, and it's attached to the test chamber on our H2 GrainGages. There on the right picture, I hope you can see that kind of that glass dome or that half sphere that's right down in the test chamber. You all know that's where we would normally put the moisture and test weight measurement in our H2, but now in the H3, that's all handled in the same test chamber, but with the SCiO NIR sensor. We plan on shipping these in hopefully right around June of this year, for hopefully get out there before the wheat harvest starts. These are going to be shipping from the factory as an H3 system complete, or as an upgrade kit to an H2 GrainGage to make it into an H3 with the integrated NIR sensor. All right, so here in this kind of that picture or model of the SCiO sensor and that half a sphere, you can see that half sphere housing there. That's where the scan actually takes place. And you can see this is kind of different from some of those other surface mount sensors available out on the market. This half sphere, what that does, it gains us a larger, I guess you could say, surface area of the grain for that measurement to take place, for that scan and the measurement. Currently, we have moisture and constituent data on grains of corn, wheat, soybean, and barley for this year. We're continuously expanding these calibrations along with the help of SCiO through thousands and thousands of plots harvested and tested yearly across the globe. We will manage these calibrations annually through an update in the software with the help of SCiO. And really, what it comes down to is this is just a lab quality NIR right there in the field at an affordable price. Some of the benefits, obviously, you know, we've been saying affordable. This is going to save you a lot of money compared to some of the other options out there on the market, where you may have to purchase that sensor and you may have to build the calibrations yourself and go through all that work. Well, you don't have to now, because the calibrations are included with the help of SCiO and some of the work we've done with them to provide those calibrations. And everything's done, as Ray mentioned, right down in the SCiO sensor and on the tablet. There's no cloud referencing to get those predictions. It's all down at the GrainGage level where we get that. Like I said, there will be, to be able to do that, there will be an annual calibration and a maintenance fee. Obviously, this is going to save you a lot of time where you don't have to go bag all those samples and take them back to the lab or send them off to a third-party lab somewhere. Like I said, it's all happening right there in the field to save that time. And along with sending those samples off or taking them back to the field or bagging them, you don't have to do that anymore, and that's really going to reduce the the risk of a bag or a sample getting mislabeled, or you run that through the lab and then it gets mislabeled or the data gets put in the wrong place. That's not going to happen anymore, because like I said, you harvest the plot and then we get that data just like we do with the normal weight, moisture, and test weight. It's right there. And all these calibrations and testing we've done, that's been verified against lab grade NIR sensors or third-party labs wet chemistry too.
Thanks, Ryan. And something important I want to repeat that Ryan said was the sensor that you're going to get in the GrainGage is the exact same sensor that's out in the field right now with over 1,000 cups and 2,000 SCiO minis in the field. The calibrations are the same. We just made them localized. And so what you can expect from the GrainGage is really the same quality that you get from a SCiO cup or a SCiO mini. So that was important to us in case customers wanted to use a reference such as a SCiO cup. We wanted that to match perfectly and use those calibrations that were based off those thousands of data points that Ryan mentioned for SCiO's global database. And so that's kind of an important part here. In these next few slides, really talk a little bit about the data. I don't want to put everybody to sleep with too much data talk, but I definitely thought it was important to just give you some information about some of the data we collected this summer and some of the prediction results that we got. So like Ryan said, we have predictions available when we release this product for soybean, corn, wheat, and barley. You can see the constituents there in the supported range of those values. So supported range on moisture for soybean, for example, is 6 to 21%. In that range, the specification that we are advertising for that range is the RMCE values are listed. And then within the temperature range that we've got listed there are where the calibrations are most robust, so that RMSE value is actually validated. So data-wise, really interesting. This first slide was taken. What happened was there was a bunch of samples used and a calibration was created. Calibration, in this case, it was calibration for wheat moisture and wheat protein. This is by SCiO. And after that calibration was built, they introduced samples that were foreign to that calibration. So none of the samples that you see on the screen right now were used in the data set to create the calibration. They ran it through the SCiO, and then we also sent samples to a lab. And what you can see there, compared to the lab reference, we had about a 0.24 and a 0.34 standard error with almost no bias, and that's for moisture and protein on wheat. But we wanted to also really be conscientious of effects that the combine might have on the NIR sensor on the grain gauge. You know, with a SCiO cup, you're sitting on a bench in a nice stable environment. You're not dealing with some of the elements and the different variables that you might experience on a combine. So we got a NIR grain gauge mounted on a combine, and we actually harvested some contracted plots that we acquired. Harvested those plots with the on-combine NIR grain gauge, got the results from the grain gauge, and then also took samples and ran those samples through a benchtop moisture device. In this case, it was a Perton, for us to get a standard error of about 0.74 with no bias. You can see we're really happy with these higher moisture ranges, even up above 25%. We got really good results. Like I mentioned, something else that's important is a correlation between what we see on the combine and also cups. So we took those samples, and we also, on this next slide, I show when we ran those samples through the SCiO cups, we wanted to see that same standard error, which we really saw a great correlation of the standard error, about 0.6 and 0.7, with a little bit larger bias than what we saw on the combine. So this was corn, and like I said, we had quite a few samples above 25%, but that's just really kind of represents the correlation that we got between the cups and the grain gauge, and then we compare it to a benchtop device. This next slide is really interesting. This was wheat, and it was about 206 samples that we had. We had an NIR grain gauge alongside about 4 SCiO cups, and the great thing about this data set is we had some benchtop NIR data that the company that was working with us and allowing us to test their samples provided. It was taken at a different time, so you see a little bit of a bias for their benchtop NIR on the moisture. But the interesting thing here, 2 takeaways really, was the H3 GrainGage, which is labeled as H2 test stand, correlated just really perfectly with the SCiO cups that we ran those same samples through. So that correlation was really important to us and something we've been watching all summer long as we tested. The other interesting thing was this benchtop NIR in this case was considered the gold standard for this company, and you can see kind of that slope and the more scattered red dots there didn't get quite as good of a prediction result when compared to the Perton that we use as a reference. And then this next slide, we also got protein results from those same wheat samples. We sent those to a third-party lab. So the reference in this case was a third-party lab where wet chemistry was done on those samples. Again, same 206 samples. And you can see the grain gauge, the SCiO cups all performed in line with the benchtop NIR, and also with lined up really well with the lab analysis done. The standard errors ranging from about 0.2 to 0.3 with not very significant biases in any case. And this one is some soybean information that we got. So in this case, we had almost 500 soybean samples that we harvested in the field with an NIR grain gauge, the H3. We took those samples back to a lab. We bagged those samples and took them back to a location where we ran them through 3 different cups. Now, in this case, the customer did not want those samples sent out of house. And so as a reference, we used the 2 SCiO cups, SCiO cup number 1 and 2 as the reference, and compared the grain gauge and all the cups to that. You can see standard error, really good correlation again between the cups and the on-combine NIR. And then this last data set is really interesting. Many of you might be familiar with the release of our M2.0 moisture. Prior to 2021, we were using what we called the EM method. Internally, we call it that, where we have an algorithm we predict moisture with. And in 2021, we came out with new algorithms that we call M2.0. We wanted to see how EM and M2.0 compared to a SCiO device. And so in this case, we had 136 corn samples, many above 25%. We had 20 samples over 25% and 2 samples above 30%. But we ran them through those devices and predicted with EM moisture, M2, and a SCiO. The really interesting thing is if you look, kind of focus on the data, lower than 20% moisture, all three performed really quite well. They stuck tight to the benchtop device that we used as reference, which in this case again was a Perton. And you've got really good results. But the interesting thing is as that moisture increases, you see the EM moisture, which is a method we don't use anymore. We stopped using that in 2021. You see those yellow dots start to drift away from the reference. You see on the M2.0 a much better result. They stick to that reference a lot better as those moistures increase. But the great thing about the SCiO is we really saw very little deviation from the reference. You can see those bottom three numbers I've got listed here are 1.5 standard error for the EM, 0.7 for the M2, and then for the SCiO we got down to 0.4. So just kind of wanted to highlight this slide to show you some of the differences and the improvements that we're making. And just excited about this SCiO sensor, excited to get it out on the market, and really think it's a great solution and provide some value for everybody.
All right, thanks, Ray. In this slide here, you can see this is a screenshot of Miras in the harvest screens with the quad view, and hopefully you can see here in the lower left quadrant and the upper right quadrant in Miras that we're displaying the SCiO data as it comes through, just like it would in normal harvest mode with a normal H2. Now you're going to see the weight moisture test weight and also the SCiO moisture, the SCiO oil, and the SCiO protein. So you can see how that's going to look in the harvest screens, and obviously that's going to be available in the map file and then also in the backup file that we have as well. So. And this SCiO NIR sensor, it's going to be available in all of the current H2 GrainGages. So there will be an H2 or an H3 Classic, an H3 Single, and also an H3 Twin that you see there. We're going to be able to update any of those systems, any of those H2s, and make them an H3. Like I said, we can install them at the factory and make them an H3 system. We can also do update kits out in the field. It's not a hard update, and it shouldn't take long to do. Just come out with one of our normal service visits like we normally do and throw the new sensor kit on there and have you up and going with an in-field NIR sensor. And again, we hope to start shipping those in June of this year. So with that, I guess we'll end there with our presentation, and just want to thank everybody that attended today. I'm sure you've got some questions, and we really appreciate you guys coming out and listening to this. It was kind of a dump on you, but I'll go ahead and try to answer a few of these questions here. See a lot of them about price, and we are actually finalizing that price here in the next probably in the next week. We'll have pricing finalized on that and some part numbers and start being able to quote that. There's I'll reach out to everybody here that's got a question on price. I'll reach out to you individually and we can work on some quoting to make sure we've got everything set up right on your current system, or if you need a whole new H3 system, we can make sure that's going to fit on your current machine or what we need to do to get that going. But yes, we'll reach out and cover price on that. Ray, I'll let you take some of these other questions.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Ryan. First question from Michael Steckler was, will canola oil content be available eventually? The answer is yes. In fact, canola is one of the constituents, one of the crops we really wanted to have ready for this season. We're not going to have it ready for this season, but it is on the roadmap and slated for release for next harvest season. So we want to have that ready by Q4 of 2022, so we make sure to hit that 2023 harvest season. But yes, canola is one of our higher priorities that is definitely part of our roadmap. And then Matt Bickle asked, here in Minnesota, we harvest a lot when it's cooler than 40 degrees. So how is the accuracy when in those conditions? So So at cooler than 40 degrees, it's interesting because once you get down below 32, the data is junk. You know, your moisture's frozen, and providing a prediction below freezing level really is not valuable. But what we have seen between about 33 and 40 is those standard errors still are actually really good. In fact, I can go back to the slide where I had those listed. But what we're saying here is these root mean squared errors are valid for the moisture ranges listed here. That doesn't mean we won't provide you a prediction when you're outside of those ranges. It just means that the prediction won't be as robust as if you were inside the range. These temperature ranges were part of the development of the calibration. And so that's where we have tested, and that's where we're confident in these root mean squared errors. But that doesn't mean we won't give you a prediction outside of that. The standard error, I don't know the exact numbers between 32 and 40 degrees, like what you're seeing, what you're harvesting in Minnesota. You're not going to see a massive variation from these errors that I'm showing. So we're confident that it's going to be valuable data for you. It's just we don't advertise down to that low because the calibration is not quite as robust outside of these ranges. And this next question from Pat, it says, do you collect any other values for corn other than moisture, such as protein, starch, and oil? It's a good question, Pat. Part of our roadmap, again, for release in 2023 is starch for corn. We want to have that ready by Q4 2022, so it's ready for harvest 2023. We're working right now to get that developed. We're going to be working through 2022, collecting samples and building that calibration. And then as far as protein and oil goes, we're really taking a look this year at what the most important constituents are to provide to customers. And it's very well possible that we may do a protein and oil, but we have to make sure it's justified. There's a big enough business case for each one of those. We're anything that's not on our roadmap, which right now is canola and starch for corn, we're going to evaluate and determine what our next priority is. But we're always going to, our plan is to continuously expand these calibrations to add constituents year after year. Let's see, price. Scott asked about price, and I think Ryan addressed that. How long does it take to measure a plot? We are in the current process right now of developing the software, so we can't tell you an exact time of how much of an increase there will be with the SCiO measurement. Once we have final software available, we're going to have that information. But right now, all summer long, we've just been using prototype software, so I can't really give a good answer on how much time it's going to take to do a scan. But it's going to be comparable to what a GrainGage is doing now. It's not going to be exact, but it's going to be comparable to the time it takes right now for us to take a scan. Another price question, which I think Ryan took care of. Cycle time, I think I covered that one. Gregory said, issues with trash ending up in the NIR sampling vessel. I work with soybeans. Our plot samples can have sticks, stems, and pods in them. Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, we saw that too, and we have ran some tests where we actually purposefully used a trashy sample and a clean sample. Specifically on wheat was one where we ran the dirty sample that had a lot of junk in it, and then we ran a clean sample. And we didn't see a very significant difference in the reading. There were times where if we had a big leaf or something from a corn stalk on there, that it gave some variation from the reading. But overall, we haven't seen really any problems with trash. And I asked SCiO about this. There are NIR experts, and that's who we go to with these kind of questions. And the way they explained it to me was, the range that the sensor is looking for, most of the time trash is not within that same range. And so they use machine learning, and their algorithms actually know what ranges to ignore. And so it's actually kind of a smart software that can recognize some of the trash, and they're making some efforts there to filter that out. Let's see, Brody asked, with current moisture blades, the temperature swings will cause us to need different moisture calibration curves. Does this transition well on wide temperature swings in the Wisconsin harvest days? Temperature-wise, what we're seeing really, the SCiO performs much, much better with temperature variations of the sample. There is a little thermometer in there that's taken the sample temperature, and it's inside the sensor, and so it's a little bit more reflective of the electronics in the sensor, but we are taking a temperature and factoring that into the predictions. But what we've seen really, even on these high moisture and these out of range temperatures, we're getting really good predictions. What happens to samples that are...
You want to do one more, Ray?
Sure.
Okay.
What happens to samples that are above 30% grain moisture in corn? We are still going to provide a prediction above 30%. It just won't be within that most robust part of the calibration. We're going to pop up a warning when we are outside that range, so customers know that this isn't the most robust prediction, but we're still going to provide a prediction.
All righty. Thanks a lot, Ray. And thanks everybody for joining today. We'll reach out to everybody that was here that had questions, or see if you've got any more questions, and make sure we've followed up on those questions enough for you. So again, feel free to reach out if you do have more questions, but we'll be getting in contact with most of you here after this to make sure we've helped you out as much as we can. So thank you guys for listening to this presentation on the H3 GrainGage and the SCiO NIR sensor.